A cowboy expected a simple bride. The wild woman who arrived changed his life forever. Jack, a tall and sturdy man with hands roughened by years of hard work, had always found peace in this rhythm of life. Every day followed a familiar pattern, feeding the horses, checking the fences, and making sure the cattle were safe and healthy. He loved the land as much as he loved life itself. It was steady, dependable, and honest, just like him. Despite his satisfaction with ranch life, there was a quiet yearning in Jack's heart. He was 32 now, and while he had many friends and neighbors who respected him, he had no one to share his life with in the way he secretly hoped. He dreamed of a simple home, a family, and a woman who could walk beside him through the highs and lows of frontier life. But living in a remote part of the West made finding such a person a challenge. Letters had become Jack's small window into the world of possibilities. For years, he had corresponded with women from nearby towns, exchanging careful words in neat handwriting. Some letters were polite but boring, others enthusiastic yet fleeting. He knew what he wanted, though he hadn't yet found it. He wanted a woman who would understand the quiet of the plains, who would value the early morning sun as much as he did, and who could live contentedly in a life without many luxuries. His friends often teased him about it. "Jack, you're looking for a saint in the middle of nowhere," they would say with a grin. "A woman who can bake bread, mend fences, and still have time to read poetry in the sunlight. Good luck with that." Jack would smile, shaking his head. He wasn't in a hurry. He believed that the right woman would come when the time was right. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned fiery shades of red and gold, a letter arrived that made Jack's heart beat faster. It was from a woman named Clara, a woman who had been recommended by a mutual acquaintance. She wrote with warmth and humor, describing her life in the nearby town and her fondness for animals, nature, and adventure. Unlike other letters, hers carried a spark that made Jack feel a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Jack read the letter several times, imagining what Clara might be like. He pictured a gentle, quiet woman who would sit with him on the porch after a long day, sharing stories and laughter. He imagined teaching her how to ride horses safely, how to milk cows, and how to navigate the small joys and hardships of ranch life. He thought of the simple life he longed for, and in his mind, Clara seemed to fit perfectly. As the days passed, Jack prepared for her arrival. He cleaned the house, repaired the fences that were beginning to sag, and made sure the barn was in perfect order. Everything had to be ready. He wanted to make a good impression, even though he knew that life on a ranch was rarely perfect. His neighbors noticed the unusual bustle around his property and offered advice. "Don't worry too much, Jack. Women can handle more than you think," one friend said with a wink, but Jack couldn't help it. He was nervous, hoping everything would go as he imagined. Finally, the day came. Jack rode out to the main road, scanning the horizon for any sign of the carriage that would bring Clara to his ranch. The sun was high in the sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and fresh earth. Jack's horse trotted steadily, but his mind was racing with anticipation. What if she wasn't as kind as she seemed? What if she couldn't adapt to ranch life? He shook his head, reminding himself that worrying would not help. Then in the distance he saw a cloud of dust rising. A carriage approached, moving steadily along the dirt road. Jack's heart pounded. As it drew closer, he saw a woman seated confidently at the front, holding the reins with ease. She had dark, lively eyes and a wide smile that seemed to radiate energy. Jack blinked. This was not the quiet, gentle woman he had imagined. The carriage stopped in front of the ranch, and the woman jumped down with a grace and confidence that surprised him. She introduced herself as Clara, her voice strong and cheerful, and she shook Jack's hand firmly. Her energy was infectious, and although it made him a little uneasy at first, Jack couldn't help noticing that she seemed completely at ease in the open air, as if she belonged there. From the very beginning, it was clear that Clara was not the type of woman who would follow a quiet, predictable path. She laughed freely, spoke boldly, and looked at the world with a curiosity that was both exciting and intimidating. She examined the horses, touched the fences, and even climbed a tree to get a better view of the land, all while Jack watched in a mix of surprise and admiration. Jack had expected a bride who would quietly settle into the home, learning the rhythms of ranch life slowly and carefully. Instead, he was faced with someone who seemed ready to jump into the life he had built with both feet, unafraid and unrestrained. At first, he felt a little overwhelmed. How could someone so wild, so full of energy, fit into the calm, steady life he had imagined? But as the day went on, Jack began to see that Clara's energy was not chaos, it was passion. She asked questions about the land, about the cattle, and about the work he did each day. She offered suggestions for improving the fences, noticed when a horse seemed nervous, and even helped him repair a broken gate with surprising skill. Jack began to realize that while Clara was different from what he had imagined, she had strengths that complemented his own. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of nature settling in for the night. Jack found himself talking to Clara more openly than he had spoken to anyone in years. She listened with interest, asked thoughtful questions, and even shared stories of her life in the town, her adventures, and her dreams. For the first time, Jack felt a sense of excitement about the future that went beyond simple expectations. He realized that life with Clara might not be the quiet, predictable existence he had always imagined, but it could be richer, more colorful, and full of experiences he had never dared to dream of. That night, as the stars emerged one by one in the clear western sky, Jack lay awake thinking about the days ahead. He understood that his life was about to change in ways he could not yet fully imagine. Clara had arrived with energy, boldness, and a spirit that challenged everything he thought he wanted. But rather than feeling fear, Jack felt a quiet thrill. He knew that the simple life he had always dreamed of might now be replaced by a life that was fuller, deeper, and more alive than he had ever expected. The next morning, Jack watched as Clara moved around the ranch with ease, talking to the animals as if they were old friends and handling the chores with surprising skill. She laughed at the mistakes she made, celebrated small successes, and approached every task with determination. Jack began to understand that her wild spirit was not a threat to his life. It was a gift. Over the following days, Jack and Clara worked together, learning each other's rhythms and ways of thinking. Jack discovered that Clara had a clever mind and a practical approach to problems that often surprised him. She suggested new ways to organize the barn, improve the fences, and even care for the animals more efficiently. Slowly, Jack began to admire her not only for her spirit, but also for her intelligence and resourcefulness. By the end of the week, Jack realized that he was no longer thinking about the simple bride he had imagined. Clara had brought energy, laughter, and a new way of seeing the world into his life. He began to feel a sense of anticipation for the future, eager to see how their partnership would grow and how their differences could shape a life that was far richer than anything he had planned. Jack knew that challenges would come. Life on a ranch was never easy, and Clara's energy could be overwhelming at times. But he also knew that with her by his side, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Her arrival had already changed him, showing him that life could be exciting, unpredictable, and full of possibilities, even in the quiet, steady world of the ranch he had always loved. And so, as the sun set on the first week of their life together, Jack Turner understood something important. Sometimes, the life you imagine is not as rewarding as the life you never saw coming. Clara had arrived, wild and free, and in doing so she had opened the door to a future that promised adventure, growth, and a kind of happiness that could never have been planned. Jack felt a smile spread across his face as he looked at Clara laughing in the distance, riding a horse faster than he thought possible. For the first time, he did not worry about whether life would be calm or predictable. Instead, he looked forward to each day, knowing that it would be full of surprises, lessons, and the kind of love that changes a man forever. The morning after Clara's arrival, the ranch was alive with energy in a way Jack had never experienced before. Birds chirped more loudly, the horses seemed more alert, and even the cattle seemed to move with a different rhythm. Jack rubbed his eyes, not sure if it was the brightness of the sun or the unusual liveliness brought by Clara. He looked out over the land and realized that life on the ranch was no longer just his. Clara had already made her presence felt. Clara was up before the sun, humming a cheerful tune as she moved around the barn. She had learned quickly how to feed the animals and even began giving names to each of them. "This one looks like a troublemaker," she said with a laugh, pointing to a young colt that had been acting restless. Jack couldn't help smiling, although he still felt a little overwhelmed by her energy. "Careful, Clara," he warned gently. "That colt can kick if you're not ready." He had imagined a bride who would move slowly, learning the ways of the ranch one step at a time. Clara was moving at full speed from the very beginning, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up. Despite his uncertainty, Jack found himself admiring her courage. Clara climbed fences to get a better look at the fields, handled the horses with ease, and even suggested a few changes to improve the water supply for the cattle. Each time she spoke, her confidence and intelligence shone through. She was not just spirited, she was clever, practical, and fearless. As the morning passed, Jack realized that the work he had expected to do alone could now be shared. Clara's energy made tasks that once seemed tedious feel lighter and even fun. Together, they repaired a broken fence, and although Jack was cautious, Clara tackled the work with determination and laughter. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Jack felt a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. During lunch, they sat on the porch, sharing simple food and conversation. Jack noticed that Clara asked questions about everything, about the land, the cattle, and even his childhood. She listened intently to his answers, and when she spoke, her curiosity and boldness made Jack think differently about his own life. He had never considered that there could be other ways to see things, but Clara's perspective was refreshing. "I've always wanted to live somewhere wide open," Clara said, looking out over the plains. "Somewhere I could run, explore, and really feel the wind on my face. I want to know it like you do." One morning, for instance, she suggested they ride out farther than usual to check the northern pasture, even though Jack had always been cautious about going too far alone. "I want to see the land," she explained, "all of it. I want to understand what it feels like to be part of it, not just look at it from here." As they rode together, Clara's excitement was contagious. She laughed at the wildflowers, admired the distant hills, and even tried to race Jack to the next fence. At first, he felt uncomfortable with her speed and energy, but soon he realized he was enjoying the ride more than he had expected. Clara's boldness forced him to embrace life in a way he had never allowed himself to before. At night, they would sit by the fireplace in the small cabin, talking about the day and sharing stories. Clara told tales of her childhood in town, her adventures, and the ways she had learned to be independent. Jack shared memories of growing up on the ranch, of the hard work and long days, and of the quiet pleasures that only someone who lived close to the land could understand. Through these conversations, Jack began to understand Clara better. She was not wild without reason. Her spirit was born from experience, courage, and a desire to embrace life fully. She was independent, yes, but she also had a deep respect for nature, animals, and people. Jack realized that her energy could complement his steadiness rather than clash with it. However, not everything was easy. There were moments of tension as Jack struggled to adjust to Clara's pace. She would often act on instinct, taking risks that made Jack nervous. Once, she attempted to calm a frightened horse without waiting for his advice, and the animal bolted, sending Jack running after her. Clara emerged unscathed, laughing while Jack's heart raced. "See, he's not so bad," Clara said, patting the horse. He just needed someone to understand him. Her confidence forced him to reconsider his own cautious nature, and slowly he began to take small steps toward embracing uncertainty. Their days continued with a mixture of work, laughter, and learning. Clara helped with the chores, but she also brought joy and spontaneity to every moment. She suggested picnics in the fields, exploring nearby hills, and even small adventures like trying to catch fish in the creek. Jack found himself smiling more often than he had in years, appreciating not just the land but the life he shared with Clara. The neighbors, too, began to notice the change. They commented on how lively the ranch had become, how Jack seemed lighter and happier, and how Clara's presence was like a fresh breeze across the plains. Jack felt proud, not of the work alone, but of the way Clara had become part of the life he had built. She was not just his companion, she was a partner who challenged him, inspired him, and made every day feel fuller. One afternoon, a small storm rolled in from the west. The wind picked up and dark clouds covered the sky. Jack had faced many storms on the ranch, but Clara had never experienced one like this. She watched the sky in awe, her eyes wide with excitement and a hint of fear. "This is incredible," she said, gripping Jack's arm. "It's like the land is alive, isn't it?" She tied down loose objects, helped herd the cattle into a safer area, and even climbed to secure a part of the roof that threatened to blow away. Jack realized that her wild spirit was balanced by practical intelligence and courage. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was intact, and Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude. Clara's presence had not only made the work lighter, but had also made him see his land and life through new eyes. The storm had been a challenge, but it had also been a lesson. Together, they could face whatever came their way. As the days turned into weeks, Jack began to accept that life with Clara would never be the quiet, predictable existence he had once dreamed of. It would be louder, more chaotic at times, but also richer, fuller, and deeply rewarding. He learned to laugh at unexpected moments, to take small risks, and to appreciate the joy that came from embracing life fully. Clara, in turn, began to appreciate Jack's steadiness. His knowledge of the land, his calm decision-making, and his unwavering dedication to the ranch provided a foundation for her wild spirit. Together, they created a balance neither had expected, learning from each other and growing stronger as partners. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, Jack watched Clara ride one of the horses at full speed, her hair flying in the wind, her laughter carrying across the plains. He felt a deep sense of awe and admiration. She had arrived as a surprise, a wild woman who did not fit the simple life he had imagined, and yet she had already changed his world forever. Jack knew that challenges lay ahead. There would be tough seasons, unexpected problems, and moments when their differences might clash. But he also knew that with Clara by his side, life would never be dull. She had brought excitement, courage, and a new perspective to his quiet world. And for the first time, he felt that the life he had dreamed of could be even better than he had ever imagined, full of adventure, love, and growth. Clara dismounted her horse and ran toward him, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Come on, Jack. The sunset looks amazing from the ridge. Let's go see it." It would be real, it would be alive, and it would be a story they would write together, one day, one adventure, and one lesson at a time. Jack Turner had expected a simple bride, but what had arrived was someone wild, courageous, and full of life. And in doing so, she had already begun to change his life forever. Life on the ranch had begun to change in ways Jack Turner could never have imagined. Clara's presence had brought energy, laughter, and a new perspective to the quiet routines he had lived by for years. Yet, as the weeks passed, Jack realized that the true challenge of having Clara by his side was not just learning to enjoy her spirit, but learning to adapt to it during times of difficulty. Their bond was growing, but it was about to be tested in ways neither of them could foresee. One early morning, a harsh wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of a storm. Jack was checking the fences near the northern pasture when he saw Clara approaching with a determined stride. Her eyes were bright with excitement, but there was also a hint of concern. "Jack, the river looks higher than usual," she said. "We should move the cattle closer to the barn before it gets worse." "Let's gather the cattle." By the time they had secured all the animals in a safer area, both were soaked and exhausted. But instead of frustration, Clara laughed, shaking water from her hair. "See, Jack, nothing we can't handle together." He realized that this was the first of many moments where Clara's spirit would teach him to face challenges without fear, and sometimes even with a sense of joy. Over the next few days, the storm left its mark on the ranch. Fences were damaged, the barn roof had a small leak, and some of the younger animals were stressed and unsettled. Jack had always managed these challenges alone, relying on experience and patience. But with Clara's help, the work became not only easier but also filled with moments of unexpected fun. Clara suggested they turn the repair work into a kind of game. "Whoever fixes the most fence posts before lunch gets to choose the evening's activity," she said with a mischievous grin. Jack laughed at her suggestion but agreed. For the first time, routine labor felt lighthearted. They worked side by side, teasing each other, sharing stories, and laughing when mistakes happened. The chores that once felt tedious now became a way to strengthen their bond. Jack noticed that Clara's boldness often helped him solve problems he might have spent hours thinking over alone. Yet it wasn't always easy. Clara's impulsive nature sometimes clashed with Jack's cautious approach. One afternoon, she insisted on riding a young, untrained horse across the steep hills, despite Jack's warnings. The horse bucked and spun, and Jack had to rush to catch her before she fell. Clara emerged laughing, holding the reins tightly. "See, I told you I could handle him," she said, her eyes sparkling. Jack shook his head, heart racing, but he couldn't hide his smile. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he admitted. "But sometimes courage needs a little bit of caution, too. I want to feel alive in this place, not just survive it." Slowly, he began to take small risks he would have avoided before, enjoying the thrill of new experiences while still remaining responsible for the ranch. As the weeks went by, their partnership deepened. Jack taught Clara the skills he had learned over years: how to mend fences properly, how to recognize the signs of illness in the cattle, and how to manage the land during difficult seasons. In return, Clara taught Jack to see beauty in spontaneity, to laugh at mistakes, and to find joy even in hard work. Their relationship became a delicate balance of steadiness and adventure, each learning from the other in ways neither had anticipated. One particularly challenging week tested their bond like never before. A wildfire had broken out on the far edge of the ranch. Jack spotted the smoke while checking the fences early one morning and immediately realized the danger. The fire was moving quickly, and if it reached the dry grass near the barn, it could destroy everything they had worked so hard to build. Jack knew he couldn't fight the fire alone. He turned to Clara, who had already saddled her horse and was ready to help. Together, they gathered buckets, shovels, and whatever tools they could find to create fire breaks and guide the animals to safety. Clara's fearlessness shone through as she directed the younger workers from the neighboring ranches, keeping everyone calm and focused. Hours passed with hard labor and tense moments. The fire roared dangerously close at times, and Jack could feel the heat on his face as he worked alongside Clara. Yet, through it all, she remained composed, encouraging him when he felt overwhelmed and finding clever ways to divert the flames. By nightfall, they had managed to save the barn and most of the fields, though the northern pasture was scorched. Exhausted, Jack and Clara sat by the remnants of a small fire, their clothes dirty, faces streaked with sweat and ash. Clara leaned against Jack, her eyes reflecting both relief and excitement. "We did it," she whispered. Jack nodded, feeling a surge of pride and affection. "Yes, we did it together. I couldn't have done it without you. And I couldn't have done it without you. That's what makes us a good team." He had always thought of life on the ranch as steady and predictable, but now he saw that strength, courage, and partnership could turn even the most challenging situations into opportunities for growth and connection. The following weeks were filled with smaller adventures and lessons. Clara explored the surrounding hills, discovering hidden streams and secluded meadows. She suggested planting a small garden near the cabin, which Jack had never considered, and together they tended to it, watching their vegetables grow as a symbol of their shared life. Jack began to notice the little things that made Clara special, the way she laughed at the sound of a hawk, the way she comforted frightened animals, and the way she always found joy in simple moments. He realized that her wildness was not just about energy and adventure, it was about a deep appreciation for life itself. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills. Clara leaned her head on Jack's shoulder, and for a moment the world seemed perfectly still. "Jack," she said softly, "I never imagined a place like this could feel like home, but with you it does. And you've shown me that strength, patience, and love can be just as wild as adventure. We balance each other, Jack. That's what makes this life so special." Jack learned to appreciate the thrill of risk, while Clara learned the value of caution and planning. Together, they created a life that was not just about surviving on the ranch, but about thriving, growing, and finding joy in every moment. Neighbors often commented on the changes they saw in Jack. He was lighter, happier, and more open than ever before. Clara's influence was clear to everyone. The once quiet cowboy had grown into a man who could embrace life fully, thanks to the wild woman who had entered his world and refused to leave it unchanged. Jack understood that life with Clara would never be predictable or simple, but he had come to love that unpredictability. Her energy, courage, and perspective had transformed not only the ranch but also his heart. He no longer feared change or challenges. Instead, he welcomed them, knowing that together they could overcome anything. One day, as the first snow of winter fell gently over the plains, Jack watched Clara ride a horse across the frozen fields, her laughter carrying through the cold air. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her presence, realizing that the life he had once imagined was nothing compared to the vibrant, full life they were building together. Jack Turner had expected a quiet, simple bride, someone to share routine and calm with. Instead, he had received Clara, a wild, fearless, and spirited woman who had transformed his life completely. Through challenges, adventures, and shared work, they had discovered a partnership that was strong, balanced, and deeply fulfilling. And as the snow fell softly around them, Jack knew that their story was only beginning. Winter had settled over the plains, painting the ranch in soft shades of white and silver. The cold wind blew across the open fields, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow and the quiet hush of the season. Jack Turner stood at the edge of the barn, watching the snowflakes dance in the pale morning light. He took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. It had been a long journey since Clara's arrival, and the ranch, like Jack himself, had changed in countless ways. Clara emerged from the cabin, bundled in warm layers, her cheeks rosy from the cold. She carried a small basket of freshly baked bread, the aroma warming the chilly morning air. "Good morning, Jack," she called, her voice bright and cheerful despite the frost. "I made some breakfast before the work begins." Even in winter, the animals need their feed. The rivers froze partially, the cattle needed extra care to stay healthy, and the horses required constant attention to prevent injuries in the icy fields. Jack had faced winters before, but Clara's presence made even the hardest days feel manageable and even joyful at times. She had learned quickly how to handle the cold, how to protect the animals, and how to keep the cabin warm and welcoming. Her energy never seemed to fade, and her optimism lifted Jack during moments when the harshness of the season could have felt overwhelming. One morning, a heavy snowstorm swept across the plains, covering the landscape in a thick, white blanket. Visibility was low, and the wind howled through the trees. Jack knew that some of the cattle had wandered too far and might be in danger. Without hesitation, Clara wrapped herself in extra layers and said, "We need to go find them, Jack. They're counting on us." Jack guided them gently, while Clara stayed beside him, calming the animals with her soothing voice. Hours passed, and by the time they returned to the barn, exhausted but successful, both were covered in snow and mud. Clara laughed, brushing snow from her coat. "See, nothing can stop us when we work together." "You've changed everything, Clara. I don't think I could have done this without you." Jack discovered that Clara's spirit was not just about adventure. It was about resilience, courage, and unwavering optimism. She had a way of turning challenges into opportunities for growth and joy, teaching Jack to see life from a brighter perspective. One afternoon, Jack and Clara decided to explore the northern hills that bordered the ranch. The snow glistened like diamonds under the sun, and the landscape looked magical. Clara rode ahead, her laughter echoing through the quiet hills. Jack followed, smiling as he watched her joy. She paused at the top of a small ridge, arms wide, embracing the beauty around her. "Jack, look at this," she called. "Isn't it amazing? The world feels endless up here. We balance each other perfectly." Clara's boldness and Jack's steadiness complemented each other in ways that made the ranch flourish and made their bond unbreakable. Spring eventually returned to the plains, bringing with it the promise of renewal. The snow melted, streams flowed with fresh water, and the fields began to turn green again. Jack and Clara prepared the ranch for the new season, planting crops, repairing fences, and tending to the animals with renewed energy. Their teamwork had become seamless. Jack anticipated Clara's moves, and Clara understood Jack's careful planning. Neighbors often commented on the transformation they had witnessed. Jack, once a reserved and solitary man, now radiated joy and confidence. Clara had brought life, laughter, and courage into his world, and the two had become the heart of the community. Other ranchers admired their partnership, and young couples often sought their advice on how to balance love, work, and life. One day, as they worked together in the fields, Jack paused to look at Clara. She was laughing as she coaxed a stubborn cow into the barn, her hair blowing in the breeze. Jack felt a deep sense of pride, not just in the work they had accomplished, but in the life they had built together. "Clara," he said softly, "I never imagined life could be this full, this rich. You've changed everything, in the best way possible. Together, we've created something wonderful." Evenings were now filled with quiet contentment. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories of the day, planning for the future, and simply enjoying each other's presence. Clara would playfully tease Jack about his cautious nature, and Jack would laugh, appreciating her energy and optimism. They had learned to balance each other perfectly, creating a life that was both steady and full of excitement. One evening, as the stars began to shine in the clear sky, Jack and Clara stepped outside to admire the night. The ranch was quiet, the animals resting, and the plains stretched endlessly under the moonlight. Jack felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the life they had built together was strong, resilient, and filled with love. "Jack," Clara said softly, leaning against him, "I can't imagine my life without this, without us. I expected a simple bride, but what I received was so much more. Someone who has made me stronger, happier, and more alive than I ever imagined." Jack learned to embrace unpredictability, to trust in both Clara and himself, and to see the beauty in life's surprises. Clara learned the value of patience, steady effort, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting. Over time, the ranch flourished like never before. The fences were strong, the fields were productive, and the animals were healthy. Jack and Clara's partnership had created not just a thriving ranch, but a home filled with love, respect, and joy. Their neighbors admired their teamwork, and many came to see the ranch as a symbol of what could be achieved when courage, energy, patience, and steady effort were combined. One bright morning, Jack watched Clara riding across the fields, her laughter echoing through the air. He felt a sense of gratitude and awe for the woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly and changed it forever. Clara was no longer just the wild woman who had arrived at his ranch. She was his partner, his equal, and the person who had helped him discover the fullness of life. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky with brilliant colors, Jack and Clara stood together on the porch, looking out over the land they loved and cared for. The wind whispered across the fields, carrying with it the promise of many more days, challenges, and adventures to come. Jack smiled, feeling a quiet joy in his heart. Life had exceeded his expectations in ways he could never have imagined. He had expected a simple bride, someone to share a quiet, predictable life. Instead, he had received Clara, a spirited, courageous, and passionate woman who had transformed his world. And in doing so, she had given him something far greater than he could have ever hoped for, a life full of love, adventure, and the kind of happiness that comes from truly sharing it with another person. Jack turned to Clara, taking her hand in his. "We've built something wonderful together, haven't we? And this is just the beginning." And that, he realized, was far better than any expectation he had ever held. In the quiet of the evening, with the stars shining above and the ranch peaceful around them, Jack Turner and Clara knew that they had found something rare and precious, a love and partnership that would last a lifetime. Together, they had discovered that life is not about predictability or simplicity, but about courage, growth, shared experiences, and the joy of facing the world together. And in that discovery, they had found their true home.